Alright, Spider-Man No Way Home, let's talk about it. Not gonna lie, I've got a bunch of notes on my phone about this because there's just too much to remember off the top of my head. It's a 2.5-hour film with a lot going on. I deliberately waited a couple of weeks to record this video because I thought give everyone time to watch it. If you haven't seen it by now, you probably just didn't give a shit. So that's your spoiler warning. It's probably going to be quite a long video. It's going to be quite informal. It's going to be me looking at my notes and drinking a cup of tea, but let's get into it. So what did I like about it? I mean, I liked pretty much everything. I do think it was a film of two halves. First half was your sort of generic MCU film, which was fine. It was enjoyable enough, but there was a lot of humour in there and a lot of humour that, you know, it sort of lands, but like it's nothing special. It's just a generic kind of Spidey adventure. But then the second half comes in, and when I say the second half comes in, really that's code for Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire come in, and man, they pulled that shit back. The second half of it is one of my favourite like Spider-Man stories ever, I would say, that I've seen on the big screen. One thing that really surprised me about it was how much Andrew Garfield stole the show. I think of all the actors that have played Spider-Man, he is the best actor. I'm not saying he's the best actor for Spider-Man, but I think he is the most talented actor that has played Spider-Man. And you can see that in here. You can see that he's a bit world weary by this point, and he's sort of haunted by what, you know, the events of Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Gwen and what he couldn't save her. And I know everyone kind of predicted that he was going to save MJ from the trailer alone, but I'm still glad that it happened. I'm still glad that he got that redemption. And you could see how much it meant to him. There's a few scenes where, you know, Andrew was telling Tom Holland Spider-Man to not do certain things, or to not be so rageful, or to remain sort of clear-headed and do the right thing. And I just really, you could feel the emotion. And I don't know if he shot this before he shot Tick Tick Boom or if it was the other way around, but I was getting like very similar vibes from both. Both of them, he showed a lot of emotion, and I was really impressed with him. Tobey, I actually thought was a little bit stiff at the start of this first few, like, first of all, I don't think he has as many lines as Andrew Garfield did, but the lines he does have, he starts off, he comes into it and he's a little bit stiff. And I don't necessarily mean in the way that, I know that he's supposed to be an older Spider-Man who's been out of the game for a while, or, you know, he's past his prime, but I don't mean in that way. It felt more like Tobey Maguire himself was just getting back into the role. But then sort of as the film went on, he got back into the swing of it. But yeah, I think with all that said, I think Tom Holland's performance was the best performance I've seen from him in any film that he's done. Not even just as Spider-Man, but just in general. There are some real low lows that his character has to face in this, and if those scenes don't work well, if his performance doesn't sell those emotions, then I don't think the movie really works. But thankfully, he's up to the task, and I think it was a really good origin story for Spider-Man. With all that said, it wasn't a perfect film. There were some things I wasn't a huge fan of. There were some things I thought were going to happen that didn't happen, or I thought should have happened that didn't happen. My big prediction going into the film was that Tobey Maguire was going to die. He obviously does get stabbed by the glider, but that's essentially just played for a joke. There's like no real payoff to it. There's no real point to it. I thought it would have been really nice. Not that I want to see Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man die on screen, but at the same time, I kind of do. Like, it would have been heartbreaking, but in the right kind of a way. I think if he'd died teaching Tom Holland's Spider-Man a lesson, I mean, basically, just play it out how you did. Have it be that he stops him from impaling Green Goblin with the glider, but have it that Green Goblin stabs him with the glider, but just have it that he dies. I don't get why they just played it off as a joke. They were, you know, to add some sort of stakes or whatever, or to give Green Goblin a little bit of, you know, a little bit more like something to do as a villain. I don't know, but I just didn't really. The only reason I can think of why they wouldn't kill him off is because, you know, maybe they're thinking about doing a Spider-Man 4. I don't know. But I thought it would have been a really powerful moment, and also an iconic cinema moment, to see the death of Spider-Man for the first time. And I would have, you know, Tobey is the perfect one to do it. He's old. He's probably not going to be making any more Spider-Man films. I would love to have seen that in that way, where I also really would have hated to have seen it. But I think for the story, it would have been really seminal. Daredevil as well. Daredevil shows up briefly as Matt Murdock. And yeah, it was nice to see him back in the MCU, but he doesn't really do anything. He just comes in and he says, oh, don't worry, like your legal troubles have gone. We don't see how he gets out of that. I wanted to see a court scene. Maybe there is a deleted scene of that, but I want to see, like, what did he say? How did he worm his way out of that situation? I want to see how that went down in court. At the same time, if you're going to bring, you know, Charlie Cox back into the MCU, or, you know, bring him into the MCU for the first time, why would you not have him suit up with the Spider-Man and do some kind of fighting? I didn't think he was going to have a massive role in the movie or anything, but it would just be cool to see. Or at the very least, even if he's not going to don the Daredevil costume, at the very least, I want to see how he got out of that situation at the start of the film with Spider-Man's legal troubles, because it felt so convenient for them to just be like, oh, don't worry about it, it's sorted. And I know, like, we've seen in the series that he's a great lawyer, and yes, I believe that he could get out of that situation, but you still have to show me that happening. I still have to, like, see the inner workings of that and what he says to convince the court. So I thought that was a bit lazy, but like I say, it's a 2.5 hour film. Maybe they just cut it for screen time and there exists a deleted scene out there, who knows. Another slight issue I had with the film is that, and it's more of a nitpick really, but when Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire do enter the film, it's such like an anticlimactic moment. They just sort of, well, they literally just walk on screen through a portal. And I remember seeing it in the cinema, and I remember when I saw it the first time, which was opening night, when Andrew walks through, there was like a big round of applause and people cheering and stuff, which I know a lot of our viewers are American, but in the UK, that is not something that happens a lot. From what I understand, it's quite commonplace in America for people to like really show their emotions in the cinema and to clap and cheer and whatever. You don't get that in the UK ever, really. This was the first time I can remember that happening since the credits rolled on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. That's the first time, this is the first time since then I can remember an audience clapping and cheering at the cinema. And then they did it again when Toby came on screen. And it was a cool moment that you see him sort of coming towards, coming towards the portal out of the dark, and for it, you sort of going, is that Tom Holland, or is that Andrew Garfield, or is it Tobey Maguire? And it's cool, it's a cool moment, but there was no like music swell, there was no grand entrance. That should be like a cinematic moment, and I don't know if they just underplayed it because they want to subvert expectations, or because, for the purposes of the story, like, for Ned and MJ, they don't know who this is, so it doesn't matter to them, I don't know. But I just thought they kind of missed an opportunity there to have them like swing in and do something cool. And especially with that Unite soundtrack from Michael Giacchino, I sort of thought that how that would be brought in would be that Tom Holland would be fighting, and then you would see Tobey Maguire come in, which I would have liked to have seen Tobey Maguire come in first. Maybe they saved the best till last, I don't know, but what a moment that would have been, to see Tobey Maguire swing in and save Tom Holland or something, and have his theme come in, and then the other side of the screen you have the Amazing Spider-Man swing in, and then you have his music come on. And I didn't even hear that song Unite in the film at all, so I don't know what went on with that. Oops, shit. Another thing about the film that I have mixed feelings on is all the suits that Tom Holland Spider-Man has. Now, some of them are undeniably cool, but I always just think it's so obvious when you're watching a film and they've got something in there that's clearly just in there to sell toys. I think Tom Holland Spider-Man has about 5 or 6 different suits in this film, and he doesn't need 5 or 6 suits story-wise. And they're so clearly just there because they want to sell like hot toys, or they want to put them in the next PlayStation game, or whatever it is. Like the one at the end when he's back to the red and blue, and it's like the classic costume. I love that one. That there's a reason for it to be there, and it's just classic Spider-Man, and it's taking it back to basics, which is what the story's doing. And I love that. I think that's a really good suit. But the one where Doc Ock just like gives him the nanotech back, and he's suddenly got the red and black suit with the gold on it. It's a cool suit, but it did feel when watching it where I was like, really? Is that really what Doc Ock's thinking about right now? Is about giving Spider-Man a cool looking suit? I just didn't buy it. And then with the inside out suit, again, it's a pretty cool look and it's a cool idea, but why is he wearing it inside out? I know he's got paint on the outside of his costume, but like, why does that matter? Can you not just get a new suit? I don't know. It just felt a bit like, oh, here's something else that we're going to put on there. I've seen this film a few times now, but there's still some questions I have in terms of the narrative. Like, so I love the whole idea of, we're not going to kill these villains, we're going to cure them. I love that. I don't know if this is what the filmmakers intended, but there's a really strong parallel there with things that are going on in real life. You've got certain countries like Portugal where with their justice system, they do focus on rehabilitating patients rather than just punishing them. Rather than putting them in prison, they find out why they like this and what can we do to stop it at source and to improve them as people and send them back into society, and they can live fulfilling lives and they can add something to the community. And I love that. And I don't know if that's what the filmmakers were thinking of, or if they just thought, it's a very Spider-Man thing to do, it's kinder than killing them. But either way, I like that. And I thought it was a really cool idea. But it does make me wonder if all these villains go back to the point, like literally the exact moment where they left. Like Doc Ock, for instance, is he not just going back to die anyway? Like, even though they've cured him and he's now going to be a good guy, is he not just going to die anyway? And with this experience, would that just be basically the same speech that Peter Parker gives him in Spider-Man 2? Would it not serve the same purpose as that? I don't know. So I do wonder, like, even though they're saying they're curing them and it's played off as like, yay, we cured them, realistically, half of them are just going to go back and die instantly, aren't they, anyway? I don't know. I know that they had the 5 villains, and it was one from every film prior to the MCU, so you had Green Goblin from Spider-Man, Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2, Sandman from Spider-Man 3, the Lizard from Amazing Spider-Man, and Electro from Amazing Spider-Man 2. I didn't really see the point in them being there. Like, we all thought this was going to be a Sinister Six movie, and I thought there was a possibility that maybe someone like Venom was going to come in, or maybe even Mysterio, and that a lot of this would have just been his doing. You know, maybe he was just creating it all as an illusion, I don't know. Or there was talk of Kingpin coming in, and I thought if it was going to be a Sinister Six film, fair enough. But it never was a Sinister Six film, there was only 5 of them. I just sort of didn't see the point. It felt like it overcrowded the storyline a lot, and there were some people like Lizard and Sandman in particular that just had like 5 lines maybe each and didn't really do anything or add anything to the plot. I think it would have been stronger to just focus on Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, whatever. Just focus on them more and give them more to do. Or if you are going to have this plot of, oh, well, there's loads of villains and it's about, you know, Spider-Man basically going around and catching them all and putting them in the cells, at least make it a Sinister Six film. So I thought that was kind of a wasted opportunity, and I didn't think that Lizard or Sandman really had that much to do. I don't know if there's some deleted scenes out there, but when you watch the theatrical cut, you kind of think like, what was their purpose other than the fact that there's then one villain to represent every film prior to the MCU? I don't know. Speaking of suits though, I will say I loved Green Goblin's new suit. One thing that people have always said, for as long as I can remember, is that as great as Willem Dafoe is as Green Goblin, his suit is not that great, and he kind of looks a bit Power Rangers-y. And if there's anyone that you would want to cast as a goblin because they look kind of goblinish, it would be Willem Dafoe. So why would you need to cover it up with a mask? And they obviously listened to that. And not only did they then take the mask off, it was a really cool shot when Willem Dafoe smashed the mask against the bin, and there was a reason for it as well, because they established that he had these mental health issues, and he was angry at, you know, the goblin for manipulating him and stuff. So it made sense that Norman Osborn would smash the mask, and I thought it was a really cool shot where you see the mask broken in bits on the floor. But also they gave him the green and the purple. You know, he was fighting in them and they got shredded up, and then he had those clothes, the ripped up clothes, and the no mask, and I just thought it looked really cool. So I was a big fan of his suit upgrade. Same with Electro. I never really understood the Amazing Spider-Man 2. I never understood their interpretation of Electro or why they took the direction that they went, and I don't think anyone understood that. And I think, again, they clearly listened to the fans and what we wanted, and they just gave him a makeover, basically. But he was so much cooler than he was in those films, and not just with his design, but just the way he spoke. I mean, Jamie Foxx is one of the coolest people in Hollywood anyway, and they just basically made him more like Jamie Foxx. They just made him kind of funny and cooler, and he didn't obviously have the comb over and the teeth and the glasses and everything, and his look was a lot cooler as well, where it looks a lot more comic book accurate with all the, you know, the electricity coming off him and stuff, and they didn't make him blue. So big fan of him, thought he was one of the key scene stealers of the film. And also he had a little line where he said something about, I think he was talking to Andrew Garfield, and he says like, you're from Queens, you save lives, you got powers, I just wish he was black. And he says something about how there must be a black Spider-Man out there somewhere. And I don't know if that was a tease that Miles Morales is maybe going to show up at some point. I have to imagine it is. I mean, it's the MCU. They think every detail through very carefully, and if they're throwing out a line like that, I have to assume that that's telling us something, that Miles Morales is maybe going to be in the MCU at some point. One thing I will say is I'm not 100% sure how I feel about the ending of this film. I like the idea that, like, Peter Parker is a character who has to be under constant pressure. He has to, just the odds are against him and the world's against him, but he carries on anyway because that's who he is. I love that. Again, on paper, I like the idea that he loses everyone who knew who he was forgets who he is, Aunt May's dead, and he has to make this selfless sacrifice and deal with the consequences because that's the price of being Spider-Man. I love that on paper. And I thought they executed it well as well, to be fair. But what I'm not sure about is in the next Spider-Man film, are we going to have to see Tom Holland's Peter Parker trying to convince MJ and Ned that they already know each other? Are we going to have to see a whole film of that? I mean, we've already had, I think, like Far From Home was the film where it was sort of about him and MJ getting to know each other and falling in love and all that stuff. Are we going to have to see that all again, or are they just going to gloss over it with a quick line or a quick spell or something? Or what they could even do is, I mean, they definitely won't do this, but what I would love to see here is I would love to see like a Groundhog Day riff where they spend the whole movie. It's just Peter Parker has to keep going back in time, doing the same spell and convincing MJ and Ned that he knows them without fucking it up. And every time he fucks it up, he has to go back in time, do the spell. He learns a little bit each time. I would love to see that, but they're definitely not going to do that. So I just hope that the whole of the next film isn't just Peter trying to convince MJ and Ned that he already knows them. I don't know if they're gonna... I don't think they would ditch the whole MJ storyline though, because I think people have finally got on board with it, and I think Tom Holland and Zendaya's chemistry really shines through on screen. But then also if they do just gloss over it, it kind of defeats the whole purpose and the whole power of it anyway. So I guess we'll see what they do with that. But I'm skeptical. I hope they deal with it well, and I hope it's not tedious to just sit through 2 hours of Peter trying to convince MJ that he already knows her, basically. But yeah, there was some stuff in this film that I really loved. I loved seeing the 3 Spider-Men swing together. That is one of my favourite shots ever in a film. As a lifelong Spider-Man fan, I never ever thought that that was something I would see. It never even crossed my mind. It wasn't like, oh, they could do it, but they won't. I just didn't even consider the fact that they'd consider it, you know. So to see that it just felt like a formative moment, and it's a cinema moment that I definitely won't forget. And I love the scene. I think, honestly, my favourite scene in the whole film is probably, I think it's like towards the end. I think it's just before they go into battle. I think they're in the Statue of Liberty or something like that. And the 3 Peters are just sort of talking about their experiences as Spider-Man and the villains they fought and things like that. And it's just a really wholesome scene where Toby and Tom are like telling Andrew, like, no, like you're worthy. In fact, what they actually say is you're amazing, because he's all like down on himself. And I don't know if they did that for the meta reason of he plays the amazing Spider-Man, or if it was just like a positivity thing. But I love that he was like this proper pessimistic, self-deprecating version of Spider-Man who's like, you know, you guys have fought aliens and all I thought was a guy in a rhinoceros costume. And I just thought it was like all the dialogue in that scene was exactly what I wanted to see. And it went on longer than you would think that kind of scene would go on for, because it doesn't really, I guess you could say it informs character a little bit, but it doesn't move the plot on. There's not a whole lot of point of it being there other than just for fan service, and I'm glad it was as long as it was. I could have honestly watched that scene for 10 minutes. I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. It was wholesome, and it was just nice to see 3 incarnations of Spider-Man on screen together, talking about their different experiences and stuff. I thought it was really cool. And I will say, they wrote the character of Peter Parker well, in the sense that you've got 3 versions of the same character. How do you differentiate them and not just make them all feel like the same character? And they did that well. They all feel like Spider-Man, but they all feel like different versions of Spider-Man. And I think there's there's quite a high wire act that you have to walk when writing a script like that. And I think they did it perfectly. You can tell, like, you could pick out a line and not tell me which Spider-Man said it, and I would probably be able to guess which one would have said it, and it would be right. And that's because they did a really good job of knowing each version of the character well enough. Of course, I've got to talk about Willem Dafoe as well. I think he was, other than Andrew Garfield, and I guess I would honestly say Tom Holland as well, because he did give his best performance that I've seen him give so far. But I think the other major standout in this film for me was Willem Dafoe. Because not only, I think the writing is part of it. I like the idea that they made it like a mental health issue without it feeling like they were trying to be relevant or woke or anything like that. It really didn't come across like that. It just felt like the natural sort of progression of the Green Goblin's character. I mean, if you watch Spider-Man 1, it's kind of clear that he's got some issues going on, but they don't call it mental health. He's just called crazy. But in today's day and age, you know, not to sound like the Matrix Resurrections trailer, but we don't use that word here. You know, you wouldn't call someone crazy if they had split personality, you'd call them mentally ill. And so I like that they went down that route and they addressed that. And it meant that basically Willem Dafoe had 2 parts to play. He played Norman Osborn, who was kind of this broken old man who was remorseful and scared and just wanted to go home. And then you had Green Goblin, who was maniacal and, you know, wanted to go around and cause destruction and kill Spider-Man, and he was a proper megalomaniac. And I thought he played both parts really well, but obviously it's the Green Goblin side of things that you want to see. And he has some really good lines and some good action sequences. And I'm sure I read that even at the age, I don't know how, I think he's like 67, Willem Dafoe or something. I'm sure he said that he did almost all his own stunts, because he said something like, what would be the point of just showing up and delivering dialogue? Like, I can do that in any other film that I do. So if I'm going to be in a Spider-Man film playing Green Goblin, I want to be doing the action scenes, which is really cool for a 67-year-old to still be doing his own action scenes. I love that. So I love that. I loved the costume they gave him. I loved his action scenes, some of his lines, his line delivery. I love the nuance of, you know, the distinction between Green Goblin and Norman Osborn, because Tom Holland had his plan of curing them all, and all the villains were on board with it, and it was really Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin that convinced all the other villains to like not settle for that, and he was really the one who caused a lot of the chaos to happen. He was probably the biggest threat to Peter Parker, and obviously cherry on top is he killed Aunt May. I really like Marisa Tomei as Aunt May, and I really like the relationship that she has with Peter Parker, but I think it had to happen for Peter Parker to really become Spider-Man. Like, this whole trilogy has basically been what the first act of any other Spider-Man origin story is. He's always been Spider-Man in costume, but now he's Spider-Man in here, you know? So I think that had to happen for the character to get to where he needs to be, and I like that it was Green Goblin who did it. I thought it was a cool way to sort of bookend his journey from Spider-Man 2002 to Spider-Man No Way Home. I think Willem Dafoe is the best actor that has played a Spider-Man villain. There's an argument to be made for Jake Gyllenhaal and Michael Keaton, and now I think about it, actually, they've had some really good actors playing Spider-Man villains, but I think probably Willem Dafoe is the creme de la creme. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about this. In summary, I would say this is my favourite Tom Holland Spider-Man film, and the second half of it, or however far into the film it is that Tobey and Andrew come into it, from that point onwards, it's one of my... If the whole film was like the second half of it, it probably would be my favourite Spider-Man film since Spider-Man 2. But I think just because the first half of it is kind of your generic MCU film, and the plot's a bit thin, and there are certain things that I'm just not too sure about. Some of the humour didn't necessarily land, and, you know, little things like that. Because of that, it's not quite as high up as it could have been, but I think from the moment that Andrew Garfield entered, it was just elevated so much. Andrew and Tobey, and it's not even because of nostalgia. Obviously, nostalgia is a big factor in this, but I think even if you didn't grow up with those films, I think you would appreciate what they added to the story. They were there to teach Peter a lesson, and they had some really cool bits of dialogue and screen time, and it wasn't just fan service for the sake of fan service, which is, I think, what everyone was worried about. Of course, it was incredible to see Willem Dafoe back and Alfred Molina, and I think special shout out as well to Jamie Foxx, who I think was really good in this. Yeah, all in all, I think the direction was a lot slicker. Like, the action scenes were a lot more fluid than they have been in some of these other sequences. The trippy visuals as well. I know we had that Mysterio sequence in Far From Home, but I think this took that idea a whole mile further and really took it to new places and to new depths and to new heights. It was funny in part. In fact, it was hilarious in some parts, but again, mostly I'm talking about the second half when Tobey and Andrew enter it. It was hilarious, it was entertaining, it was heartfelt, it was action-packed. I think Tom Holland gave his best performance of Spider-Man so far. I think Andrew Garfield was a particular standout, Willem Dafoe was a particular standout, and it had the emotion and that darker tone that we haven't really seen in a Spider-Man film probably since The Amazing Spider-Man 2, to be fair. I think it was fun in all the right ways, but dark in all the right ways. And my only real regret is that I just kind of wish Tobey had died when he was teaching Tom Holland's Peter Parker that lesson about not being bitter and about, you know, don't kill Green Goblin. I think it would have just been a cherry on top if he died there. That would have been such if they'd done that moment right and really executed it well, that would have been not only a formative moment for Tom Holland's Peter Parker, but it would have been just a cinematic moment, like an iconic cinematic moment. I think it would have added even more gravity to the situation, so I would have loved to have seen that. But all things considered, I think this is the best Spider-Man film of the MCU so far, and it had some of my favourite scenes ever, really, and it's definitely a contender for my favourite film of 2021. I'll be doing a video on that soon, so stay tuned. I've got a few to watch though. I need to somehow track down Licorice Pizza and a few other films that I need to watch first. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. If you've enjoyed this, like and subscribe, tell your friends, all that shit. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.